Well, it was not a good year. India begins the year before Donald Trump is inaugurated. They're assuming that they will continue to be this kind of fulcrum of U.S. policy that is there to contain China. They see themselves as kind of going between the different powers. Obviously, they have a very large trade arrangement with China, which continues to grow. Um, but then, Donald Trump comes in and things, kind of turn sour. Um, there are a number of issues. While Trump seems to be friendly to Modi and talks about how Modi is his good friend, the U.S. embarks on a number of things. One, there's this feeling within India itself that the U.S. interfered in the general election, and that denied Modi an absolute majority in his own party, and he had to join with a smaller party in order to have the required majority in the Lok Sabha, their House of Parliament. Uh, then you get into these color revolutions in Bangladesh and Nepal. That really shocks India. They see the U.S. Through various entities, the National Endowment for Democracy, actively participating. So whether it was intended or acquiesced, they sense that there was money. There's start looking at the organization, the posters. How did all these people who don't have any money come up with uniform posters and things like this? How is it all organized? And they come to the conclusion that the U.S. fingerprints are all over it. And you have the 50% trade tariff against India, which really shocks India. They don't understand. The U.S., Donald Trump says, oh, it's about you buying Russian oil. And you have this period where you have people from his administration saying just horrible things about India, saying that they're responsible for the Ukrainian war, that they're funding Russia. Well, from India's point of view, they were asked by the U.S. under the Biden administration to continue buying Russian oil because otherwise there would have been a very sharp price rise because of if you take away that much energy, the only thing you have is between demand and supply, prices go up. So India has, of course, been profiting from this, but this was all under the auspices of Washington. Now you had a new sheriff in town under Donald Trump. That all changes. And then there's this issue about Pakistan and India having, that short war, and Donald Trump making a claim that he personally settled it and he prevented a nuclear catastrophe. Well, this doesn't play well for Modi. Modi is a strongman politician. He relies on this idea that India is completely independent and separate, and that if anything happens, it's under Indian auspices. It's not something that any other nation can interfere with, and this has really, really bothered him. The Indian side felt shocked. They didn't quite know what was happening. They still felt, well, the U.S. needs India to contain China, and they were shocked. There was really not the kind of reaction that you would necessarily expect. Then Donald Trump calls Modi on his birthday and he says, wishes him happy birthday, and they seem to have a very cordial exchange. The very next day, Donald Trump tells Europe that they need to put 100% tariffs on India because of the Russian oil situation. Now, this all leads to a crisis in confidence. India had thrown a lot of its eggs in the U.S. basket, and they now were in this situation where they said, well, we have to retrench. They have been very slow to do much. Obviously, he had a, a visit to Russia, had a very toothy, big hug with Putin, and then another meeting thereafter, trying to signal that India has options. There was a trip to Busan where he, met with not Busan to China, where he met with Xi and Putin, and then there are overtures, but you haven't seen a complete break. And now India's in this awkward situation where they can continue to chase the US and take whatever kind of abuse is being handed out and not very palatable. They can try to be a kind of imbalancer between China and the US, but only if, once again, if the US wants to play ball on that, or they can try to, um, chart an independent course, perhaps drawing on, the BRICS relationship and trying to be a leader of the global South. Now, they all have pros and cons, but it has not been a good year for Modi in terms of the U.S. Now, the economic news isn't as bad as you would think. Despite all of the demands and things like that the U.S. had made, for instance, they said you have to open up your dairy and agriculture industries. That would be political suicide for India. There are hundreds of millions of farmers in India. This would threaten their livelihood, and they would, uh, in the next election, they would have their voices heard, and there'd be a new government, regardless of who it was. They would not vote for somebody who was taking away their livelihood and as being seen as being weak in the face of the United States. So very, very, very troublesome to them. They have yet to commit to any kind of real, um, program, policy. But this issue to me is emblematic. We've been paying attention, as you said, to Gaza, to Ukraine, to Europe, U.S.-China relations. But this is a good example of how what's going on in Washington is affecting the global South. And there are real patterns here. Donald Trump made it very clear he does not like BRICS. The feeling is that BRICS is big enough that it could come to Washington, especially if South American and African representatives and even EU were to show up and say, "Hey, listen, Donald Trump, knock it off. We don't care what you do to your own people. That's up between you and the voters. But if you think you're going to pit us against each other in some sort of cynical game of who can, be nicest to you or to, give as much as possible to the United States, that isn't going to happen." So he's, the pattern is clear. China and Russia are obviously in his sights in terms of tariffs. He put 50% on Brazil. He also put 30% on South Africa. He's saying he's not going to the G20 next year there because, he's accusing of being some sort of apartheid regime against whites in South Africa. So he seems to have something, the coordinated look at this, if you step back, is that he doesn't like BRICS. He wants to weaken it. He hasn't been shy about saying that. So we see a real upheaval where the United States is trying to use fear and intimidation against third world countries to bring them into line.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of the India's challenges then derives, as you said, directly from U.S. policies, and I can. Well, one has to look at all the different countries in the world, how they're trying to adjust to this new world, because there is a new distribution of power. There are many centers of power now, and it seems as if the U.S. efforts to adjust to this new world entails getting the complete loyalty of different regions. That is, you either with us or against us. For me, this mentality was exposed a bit in this Truth Social post of Donald Trump. You mentioned that Modi went to China, and when he wrote this post, I guess they chose Russia and China, and instead of us. I hope they'll be happy. This kind of mentality that he didn't really accept or even recognize that India that this is not a Cold War, that there's not two centers of power. It wants to be an independent pole of power, which means it have to be non-aligned. It wants to deal with all sides. But initially, though, the Americans have a good partner, it seems, in India if it accepts those basic premises that it wants to deal with all, because India doesn't want to see China too strong. However, it wants to work with China in BRICS. India wants to form closer economic and political ties with Russia, but that should also be good for the U.S. If, again, all roads don't lead to China only, that that it will be multipolar, that it's not all concentration in China. This would be good for the U.S., but it doesn't seem that this is enough. There has to be this uh, it challenges U.S. dominance altogether, and this is why they keep on going after all countries, trying to force them to choose. But I think it's quite counterproductive. But how do you see, though, the role of China's in this view, or in the challenges of India? Because it is, I guess, the counterpart of the United States. It has to work with China. It has its problems with China, of course. How is this relationship being challenged?
Well, it depends on from what angle you're looking at it. I mean, for India, like I said, Modi went to Tianjin. He meets with Putin and Xi, and that he has two choices. He can commit, saying, "Look, it's time for the BRICS to stand up." Remember, it's been India within BRICS which has been very reticent about challenging the United States directly. They make sure that if there's a joint communique, the U.S. and Donald Trump are not mentioned directly. They, don't want to push sanctions. They haven't been pushing hard for an alternative currency. Basically, they're being, more on the U.S. side. So when he's turned against, you'd think that he would do that. But there's a strong feeling, and I remember discussing this on a number of shows on Indian television. So you have a very distinct, choice here. And it comes with consequences. You can do Washington's bidding, but and try to use China and Russia as leverage. I said I don't think that will work. I don't think Donald Trump really cares about India. He doesn't see it as a center of power, or does he see it as a center of wealth for him? There's nothing in it. He has very little in India, and as opposed to the Middle East and other places where his family is doing a tremendous amount of business as we speak. So he just, kind of ignored it, and as you pointed out, he writes this tweet where he says, "Okay, good luck." And, it's, kind of an offhand thing, and this is really bothersome, to India, because they're thinking, "Well, we should have leverage. They should be coming back to us and saying, 'Hey, yeah, listen, maybe we're a little hard. Let's work this out. You're still part of our strategy.'" And in fact, the defense policy mentions India as, kind of continuing to be a bulwark against China. But the difficulty there is, why would India, after receiving such humiliating treatment, want to side with the US? And this is the problem that they're having in there. Now, China, from China's point of view, and Russia's, they said, okay, here's an opportunity for BRICS to stand up, because if you have India, which has been, kind of on the peripheries, saying, no, let's not do anything too rash. If they suddenly join in, and given the treatment that South Africa and Brazil are getting, all of a sudden you could have a consensus that it's time to come out swinging. It's time to tell Washington, you don't want to play with us, then we're not going to play with you. Remember, BRICS as a whole is much larger than the United States. And the United States has a lot of business interests, and there's a lot of trade that goes on. Remember, the U.S. is still the second largest exporter in the world. So from that perspective, there are, they would have a lot of power against Donald Trump. And this is what he fears. He doesn't want any kind of groupings to come up and attack him. So he's been, pushing this divide and conquer on one side. We saw the efforts in the stands where he's, trying to painted this picture of a railway that would go, between Iran and Azerbaijan and things like this, as if that would be possible. He's also, in Pakistan, he was talking about American oil investments in the most troubled part of Pakistan, Balochistan, which is also the area which leads to Bandar Port. Obviously, I don't think that was a random choice or strategic. It was basically aimed at trying to be a spoiler against the Belt and Road Initiative that China's been working on. So, all of these indirect things, China is just saying, okay, look, you should think about this and come to your own conclusion. India, we're not forcing you to do anything, but if you continue to play in between or on the U.S. side, you're going to get more treatment of the same. what was noticeable when Putin just recently went to India, he showed up with a full deck. He had his economic people, everyone from agriculture, mining. They were talking about all the deals that they could do. And it's not clear that anything has been set in stone. But, India is in this situation where it's gotta make a decision pretty soon. I don't think it has 3 years to wait. As I said, their economics, this year have actually been pretty good. They've, exported despite all the tariffs and, all the uncertainty. They've garnered some, FDI and things like that as people are trying to find bets that are more predictable, than perhaps the US. So China is just kind of wait and see. Now, on the other hand, there are irritants. China has been pressing a couple of times the people who have been detained, who were making illusions or had a birth certificate coming from a part of India that's held by India that China claims. And this has been hitting the headlines in India. It has not been doing relations between the countries any good. There's some feeling that China is trying to signal. They said you need to make a choice: are we friend or foe? On the other hand, trade relations have improved. Direct flights are now back between the two countries. They had been gone for many, many years. And also, they're easing up in terms of visas for people to get back and forth. So there's sweet and sour on that point. But I mean, I really do think the rest of the world, especially the global South, is waiting to see when India has enough of the humiliation and commits to some sort of working with like-minded countries who feel that they don't want to be under the heel of another kind of autocratic power like the United States.